Welcome to the October 9th Executive Committee meeting. Let's get started with approval of the meeting minutes for September 11th.
Move approval.
Second.
And any questions? Any public comment, Francesca?
Oh, I am, just a moment. I do see one hand raised from Josh Franco.
Is that public comment on the consent calendar?
We have to vote on these minutes?
You know what, I
sorry,
apologize.
the
I
minutes.
believe Mr. Franco wants to speak on item 2, so we should take the minutes first.
Okay, so we have a motion from Supervisor Desmond, second from Mayor Salas. Let's move to the roll call vote.
Thank you. From the City of San Diego, Councilmember Montgomery Staff. Oh, you guys. Apologies, she's being promoted now, so I'll move on and come back. For the County of San Diego, Supervisor Desmond.
Aye.
Thank you. For East County, Mayor Wells.
Yes.
Thank you. For North County Coastal, Vice Chair Blakespear.
Yes.
Thank you. For North County Inland, Chair Voss.
Yes.
Thank you. For South County, Mayor Salas.
Yes.
Thank you. And for the City of San Diego, Councilmember Montgomery Staff.
Yes.
Thank you very much. That passes unanimously.
Thank you. On to public comment. I believe you said we had one. Item 2.
Yes, Josh Franco has his hand raised to speak on item 2.
Mr. Franco, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Voss and executive committee members. My name is Josh Franco. I'm a new resident of El Cajon, and I wanted to just make a request. So I live in Main Ranch, which is a new development, about 130 single family units, and it's between Los Coches and Greenfield, adjacent to Interstate 8, obviously in El Cajon proper. I wanted to ask if Sandag could consider the installation of quiet pavement on the westbound stretch of Interstate 8 to help reduce the noise level for the residents on the north side of the interstate, which would include not only this new development, but also the residents living in the Circle RV Park just to the southwest of this new development.
Okay.
And that's all. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. If we could have somebody from staff respond to his question, that would be helpful. Any member comments?
Mayor Voss, Bill
Yes.
Wells. If the speaker's still on the line, I'd be happy to discuss that with him if he just contacts my office at cityofelcajon.us.
And Mr. Chairman, we will have staff talk to Caltrans and the gentleman. But that would be a maintenance Caltrans type project to do any type of overlay or mitigation out in East County.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Member comment, anybody? All right, we're going to move on to our executive director's report. Jim Linthicum is filling in for Hassan this morning. Take it away, Jim.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hassan does have a previous commitment, so he asked me to report on just a couple of things. First of all, last week we took Chair Norton of the California Transportation Commission on a tour of the Mar Bluffs and Midcoast Trolley. And both projects, she was able to see the incredible progress and the scale of the efforts of both these jobs. Afterwards, she participated in the ceremony at MTS announcing the delivery of the last of the new Midcoast trolley vehicles down at the MTS yard. And there was also a wonderful dedication of those vehicles to Paul Jablonski. Then last Tuesday, we gave Caltrans Director Tokes Omashakan a tour of the Mar Bluffs again, the Midcoast Trolley, and also our work at the border on SR11 and the future Otay Mesa border crossing. He was also impressed by the progress and very appreciative of the partnership we've always had between Sandag and Caltrans here in San Diego. And just on a personal note, I can tell you that it really is unique, and hopefully we never take it for granted how well this region works together, not only between Sandag and Caltrans, but also MTS and NCPD. And finally, on a less fortunate note, we heard back from the state that our unfunded mandate request was denied. This was the request that we made for the extra costs resulting from AB 805 and the creation of the Office of the Independent Auditor. So that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Francesca, do we have any public comment on that?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands raised.
Member comment or questions?
I have a question. So, Jim Lithicum, you said the state denied our request, I guess, for the unfunded mandate dollars. So they'll be providing no dollars for the chief auditor for Sandag.
Yes, that's my understanding, and I think John Kirk can fill in any more details. He has been involved. John, do you have any other information?
Supervisor, that is accurate. This went to a hearing before the Commission on State Mandates on September 25th. And this was a unanimous decision based in part on the fact that these costs can be passed on to member jurisdictions through member assessments, and that's allowed to Sandag. And then there's a more technical reason having to do with Sandag's taxing authority, and that it's actually the Regional Transportation Commission and not Sandag who has that taxing authority. And so Sandag, because of that, is not subject to the taxing and spending limitations of Article 13A and B of the California Constitution. And based upon that, that was the unanimous decision of the Commission.
Well, then I guess, Mr. Chair, the only thing I might recommend is that we perhaps agendize how we're going to deal with that, so that I don't know if that's the independent auditor as a whole is a separate hire by the board. I'm not sure how then, if this is going to be a budget item to make sure that that office is funded. I think it should be separately run or funded, by the auditor as opposed to by our executive director, because they're both our hire. So maybe some sort of a meeting in the future, an agenda item to clear that up as to how that office gets funded.
Good suggestion. Thanks, Supervisor. Any other member comment? Okay, we're going to move on. Next up is consent, and unless there are any questions, it's an information item only. The Service Bureau Fiscal Year 2020 Year-End Status Report. Any public comment or member comment? Okay. Moving on to item number 5. Robin Wapner, take it away.
Hi, good morning. So we are going over your draft board agendas this morning for your October 23rd, 2020 meeting and November 6th, 2020 meeting. Starting off with item number 5A, October 23rd. The first 6 reports are your standard items, starting off with public comments, followed by the Policy Advisory Committee Chair's report and Executive Director's report. Then your approval of meeting minutes, approval of proposed solicitations and contract awards, and your Policy Advisory Committee actions. Item number 7 on this agenda is an annual item that we bring to the board. The Transnet Environmental Mitigation Program will be asking for approval of the fiscal year 2021-2022 work plan and fiscal year 2021 annual funding. This item will go through the Regional Planning Committee and Transportation Committee before going to the board for final approval. And then items 8 and 9 are your monthly reports on Executive Director actions and meetings and events attended on behalf of Sandag. On October 23rd, the chair will bring a report to the board regarding his appointment of the nominating committee for the Sandag board officers pursuant to the Sandag bylaws. And then under reports, we do have a few items, and we're actually proposing a few changes, so I wanted to talk through those with you. Item number 11, we had agendized as the approval of post-contract solicitation for Rancho Lilac. Per the chair's request, we would like to turn this into a closed session item to discuss any potential litigation related to this item. Item number 12 is related to the South Bay Expressway in response to some questions that were raised by Mayor Salas at the Board of Directors meeting a couple of weeks ago. Staff has asked for a bit more time to collect all of the information that was requested by Mayor Salas, and so we'd like to push this item to November, December before we bring it back to the board to make sure that we can do the adequate amount of analysis to be able to answer those questions. And item 13, we would like to stay on this agenda. That's related to the 2020 Census Complete Count outreach efforts. And then we can move on to the November 6th draft agenda and answer any questions after that. So again, you have your standard items 1 through 4, public comments, policy advisory committee chair's report, executive director's report, and the PAC actions under consent. Under reports, item number 5, Don will be bringing an update to the board to talk about our capital program, short-term funding challenges and considerations. So talking about some cash flow challenges that we're facing and some options that staff would like the board to consider to address those. Item number 6 is a regional electric vehicle charging program known as Cal EVIP for San Diego County. We'd actually like to move this item to the October 23rd agenda since we'll be pushing off the South Bay Expressway item. So that would go to the board as a discussion item, and that one's also gone through the Transportation Committee. And those are all of your items for the November 6th draft agenda. I'd be happy to answer any questions on either one.
Board, any questions?
I do, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Supervisor.
Thank you. For the item 11 there that's get moved to on October 23rd, it's going to move to closed session. Is that going to be in closed session on the 23rd or at a later date?
On the 23rd.
On the 23rd. And I've gotten a lot of correspondence, I guess Sandag has also, on this item. And since it's closed session, can you remind me, I don't know if people could still call in or if they call in during open session on a closed session item, or how do we receive, I don't know, I don't remember, how do we receive public comment on a closed session item?
Yeah, before we go to closed session, we will take public comment on that item, and then we will move to closed session.
All right, thank you. I didn't remember how that worked. Thank you. And then, well, I guess then on item number 5 of 5B for the November 6th meeting, I had asked that this is on the capital program, short-term funding challenges for considerations. I'd also asked that to be heard at transportation, and I think Phil Trom had worked that out. I think it's going to be at our November, I don't know, 13th or something like that meeting. So I just want to make sure that Transportation Committee also hears that short-term funding challenges and consideration, as well as the board before the board makes a final decision on that.
Okay, thanks,
Yes.
Jim.
Chair Voss?
Yes, ma'am.
So I just wanted to talk about item number 12 on the board agenda for the October the 23rd. And we concur that the item should be pushed out in order for us to get, thorough information. And we understand that it's going to take a bit more time for Sandag to gather the pertinent information. And so, it's a concurrence of at least myself and the city manager that we do delay the report. However, we haven't reached agreement on how far out. So just to let you know.
Thanks, Mary. Any other member questions or comment?
Chair Voss?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes, sir.
that would be me.
That would be you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Appreciate it. Yeah, I wanted to make a brief comment and maybe question on item number 5 for the 23rd, noting that that is approval of contracts and solicitations, and that we actually do have an approval of contract as item number 11. It seemed a little vague to me from the perspective of not listing out which contracts and solicitations, and I just wanted to recall that at the last executive committee meeting, there was an item to approve a contract with a external law firm to defend against a potential RENA lawsuit. And this body chose not to support that. And so I do think that, we should consider sending that item back and ask for which contracts and solicitations would be actually requested to go to the full board until we understand if that particular item is part of this agenda item. And if so, I think it should be asked to be called out as a specific report item as opposed to consent, as well as maybe looking at a way to say that there should be an enforceable parameter that in approval of that item, that a weighted vote would not be called. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Any other comment?
Yes, that actually leads me into my comment on policy advisory actions for the October 23rd meeting. I again, as David Zito had said, my question was, how were we handling what happened on the 11th at our executive committee? I'm trying to find which item that was. And that was with our vote on the 3-3 vote, which means that it was a dead motion on the outside $100,000 to be used for outside litigation. So I'm wondering how we are going to have that on the agenda, because it does not show it anywhere.
Yeah, I have not chosen to put that on the agenda.
Okay, so it will not be on the agenda then.
No, it will not.
Okay, and then I guess then back to what David Zito had said, it probably wouldn't matter, but I would like to have a breakdown on that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure we can get a breakdown on what those actions are, but that item is not on the agenda. Anything else? Do we have any public comment on this item?
I don't see any public comments for this item.
Thank you. I'm happy to make a motion to approve. I need a second.
I'll second.
Second.
Sounds like it's unanimous. I'll call on the clerk for a roll call vote.
Thank you. For the City of San Diego, Councilmember Montgomery Stepp.
Yes.
Thank you. For the County of San Diego, Supervisor Desmond.
Yes.
Thank you. For East County, Mayor Well.
Yes.
Thank you. For North County Coastal, Vice Chair Blakespear.
Yes.
Thank you. And for North County Inland, Chair Voss.
Yes.
Thank you. And for South County, Mayor Salas.
Yes.
Thank you. And that passes unanimously.
Thank you. Moving on to item 6, our monthly legislative status report. We have some special guests joining us today. Robin, if you'll do the introductions.
Yes, thank you. This morning, we are really excited to have our team of advocates that support SANDAG at the state, binational, and federal levels join us today to give you a readout from this year. As you've heard through our monthly legislative status reports, even through this pandemic, SANDAG has been able to push forward on our agency's major initiatives. From Mar Bluffs, where we received nearly $30 million to help fund the bluff stabilization, to Otay Mesa East, where we're nearing completion on SR 11 construction. Central Mobility Hub, we completed a major milestone to streamline the environment process for this project. And on Midcoast, our project continues to be on schedule and under budget. A major reason that we are able to do what we do here at SANDAG is through the support of the partners that you'll hear from today. Joining us today, we have some of the best in the business. So starting us off, we have Michael Camunez from Monarch Global Strategies, who will be followed by Brooks Ellison, Pat Whalen, and Kirk Blackburn from Ellison Wilson Advocacy in Sacramento. And finally, our good friend Peter Piser from Piser Associates will be closing us off on our report today. Michael, would you like to start us off?
Great. Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the invitation to be back with you and the board this morning. I'm Michael Camunez, the President and CEO of Monarch Global Strategies. I've had the pleasure of meeting many of you, not all of you, but nice to be with you again this morning. As you know, Monarch is your principal advocate and representative in connection with the Otay Mesa East project, especially with respect to binational engagement with the Mexican federal government and the state government in Baja California, as well as with support for CBP in Washington, D.C. We really appreciate the confidence that SANDAG has placed in us over the last 4 years and look forward to providing this report to you. I want to begin by just congratulating the SANDAG team with the impressive progress that has been made with respect to Otay Mesa East, with road construction, the completion of the Tier 2 traffic and revenue study, and your impressive success in obtaining state and federal funds to support this infrastructure project. This is a project, I would say, from my perspective, having been the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, seen border crossings all over the world, this is one of the most innovative and will be, I think, state-of-the-art facilities that I think San Diego and SANDAG in particular will have a lot to be proud of. Progress on the Mexican side, as you know, has been slower than we'd like. Some of the delays can be attributed to COVID-19, but certainly not all of them. We had been working with the Sandag leadership team to plan a visit to Mexico City in March, which of course we had to cancel due to the pandemic. The departure also of the Secretary of Communications and Transportation just after the TNR report was shared with him was obviously also an unfortunate development. And this was compounded by the recent illness of the new Secretary of Communications and Transportation, who's infected with COVID, Mr. Jorge Arganis. Despite the delays, we have no reason to question the government's commitment to the project, and we expect to see more movement on the Mexican side of the border, such as with respect to the acquisition of the land now that a firm has been hired to manage that process. This is the land that's needed to install the right-of-way for the access roads on the Mexican side. A project manager has also been identified to fill that role, to fill the role that's akin to the role played by Caltrans. Now, before I go into the specifics of Otay Mesa East, the staff has asked me to provide you with a little bit of context generally on what's happening in Mexico as it relates to this project. So if you let me, I'd like to just take a quick step back and talk just a minute about the overall bilateral relationship, because I think it's important to put this project in the context of that relationship, including the current domestic challenges that are facing the incumbent president, López Obrador, or as we like to call him, AMLO. Despite what you hear, as you guys in San Diego know, the bilateral relationship is actually relatively strong despite the rhetoric and the extensive focus on immigration and the construction of the wall that had dominated the dialogue so much in the past. The July visit to Washington by President López Obrador with President Trump, though it was very light on substance, it did mark the celebration of the entry into force of the new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, the successor to NAFTA. The USMCA brings a lot of needed certainty to the economic and commercial relationship by confirming that the rules that were established under NAFTA won't change at least for the next 16 years. And given where we started with, which was a threat to withdraw from NAFTA, that can be seen as a big win. The changes, the substantive changes from NAFTA to the USMCA were not that significant in most respects, although there was the inclusion of some new chapters and updating, I would say, of the NAFTA agreement, which was very important, especially with respect to incorporating the updated labor and environment chapters into the text, means that these provisions are subject to dispute settlement now, and this is an important deal. There's also a new and updated trade facilitation chapter, which I think will come to benefit the Otay Mesa project. Beyond the USMCA, U.S. and Mexican officials continue to collaborate at the cabinet and sub-cabinet levels. For instance, you'll note that the limitations on border crossings that were implemented earlier this year in light of COVID were agreed upon jointly rather than simply imposed by the United States. And the same has occurred at the northern border. You can see it locally in the very constructive and positive relationship between the local Consul General in the San Diego area with also the Consul General for the United States in Baja. Like most countries, Mexico has been hit very hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. The virus hit Mexico later than it did in the US, but candidly, Mexico was no better prepared. As a result, the country has seen very high rates of infection and deaths as a result of, as well as extreme economic impacts. Mexico's GDP is expected to contract by 10% this year, and some analysts suggest that it will take more than a decade until 2032 to reach the 2019 income levels. AMLO's approach to governing in pursuit of what he calls a fourth transformation of Mexico includes substantial austerity measures, which means significant reductions in government spending to free up funds for his signature social welfare and infrastructure projects. And this has, of course, consequences for the Otay Mesa East project. In addition, AMLO has taken several steps related to the rule of law that has diminished Mexico's attractiveness as a place for foreign investment and is, frankly, in the eyes of many, a cause for concern. There are significant tensions at the moment between the private sector and the administration, ranging from the administration's reversal of its stance on opening the energy sector and really disadvantaging substantially a number of renewable energy projects and others, to instituting measures like public referenda on unpopular development projects. Some of you will recall the Constellation's brand vote that denied the right of Constellation Brands to build a brewery in Mexicali following a referendum of dubious validity, despite completing all of the necessary environmental impact studies and obtaining all the necessary permits. So the situation in Mexico with respect to private sector investment is not as great, frankly, as any of us who are fans of the bilateral relationship would like it to be. And we continue to push hard to the representatives of the administration to stress the importance of creating a more favorable business environment. It's also the case that the administration is pursuing some measures that I would say many observers of Mexico think reflect a weakening of traditional independent institutions and political antics, I would say, that are more about posturing and the strengthening of AMLO's grip and control over power than real substantive democratic reform. I won't go into too much of that today, except to say that these dynamics in Mexico do create challenges and create an investment climate that could have in the long-term implications for the financing of major infrastructure projects, although we think this project in particular is sufficiently strong and attractive to withstand and overcome any of those specific concerns. So with that said, all of these dynamics matter for Otay Mesa East. The good news is that the funds for land acquisition for the rights of way on the Mexican side of the border remain in the Fonadin Trust Fund and thus far have not been repurposed. The government has unfortunately taken to repurposing other public funds, but nevertheless, as a result of our continued advocacy, we've been able to ensure that, among other things, that those funds are available. We're also, we were heartened, frankly, by the government's recent announcement of some priority infrastructure projects that included the Otay Mesa East project as a priority project for the federal government. And our advocacy will continue. I would just close by saying that we think it's very important that SANDAG continue to engage senior members of the Mexican administration to continue to push them to move forward. This would include messaging on the need for greater clarity in terms of project leadership in Mexico and tangible demonstrations of the government's commitment to the project, such as the recent action it's taken with respect to land acquisition. We work very well with Hassan and his team, and will continue to do so to continue to support their efforts of engagement with the Mexican foreign minister and the new Secretary of Transportation and Communications when he recovers from COVID. And we're also, so as you may know, have brought on as part of our team new resources, including a firm established by the former head of U.S. Customs and the former acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Kevin McAleenan, who's working closely with Monarch and SANDAG on engaging CBP to make necessary arrangements in Washington to get CBP's commitment related to the strategic planning process to get this project the support it needs in Washington. So overall, I think we're making good progress. We continue to have excellent lines of communication, both with the SANDAG staff and with the leadership in Mexico and Washington. And we're very appreciative of the opportunity to work with you, and I'd be happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think we're going to go on to Brooks from Sacramento, please.
Thank you, Robin, Mr. Chair, members. Brooks Ellison on Ellison Wilson Advocacy. First thing I want to say is we really enjoy representing SANDAG. It's really been an honor, and it's I think we started representing SANDAG in 1980, so this is our 40th anniversary. Me personally started in 1986, and Kirk Blackburn and Pat Whalen of our team, I think they both have about 15 years. So we appreciate our relationship with SANDAG. I think one of the things we want to do is, and we're all going to take a part of this, but I want to talk a little bit about sort of lobbying in the pandemic and how difficult it's been. But I appreciate what Robin said in terms of the success we've had, but it's really sort of part of putting two good teams together. SANDAG has a phenomenal team, and I think we built a pretty good team at Ellison Wilson, and I think that ability to sort of work together through this environment really made a difference. Lobbying in the legislature has really been unusual, to say the least. they adjourned on March 16th, right as we got into the heart of the busiest time of the legislature. They adjourned. We don't have, really any idea of when people are going to come back, what's going to happen in the legislature, how we're going to be able to interact with the legislature. They returned in early May, but the houses were very different in terms of how they were dealing with it. And there was a certain amount of tension around there. The Assembly came back earlier. The Senate was much more restrictive in terms of the number of bills that they wanted to hear. And they also disagreed on sort of remote voting and things. And this wasn't sort of a party line disagreement. These are just the houses sort of approaching this pandemic in a different way. And so if you're doing legislative advocacy during this time, you're sort of trying to figure out how you're going to, lobby, how you're going to interact with members, how are you going to, sort of communicate your message. And you had to do it slightly different in the two houses. And it made it extraordinarily difficult. I mean, one of the problems is just on the number of bills that are introduced and were passed. I think in 2020, there were 2,390 bills. Normally, in a normal session, about half of those bills, give or take, would make it through. This time, less than 20%. So there was, extreme budget issues because of the state's response and the impact on the economy. And so you have less money to deal with it. You have a focus on dealing with the pandemic, which means trying not to sort of clear the decks a little bit on some of the other bills. And so if you're sort of fighting through with all the other bills that you're working on, you sort of had to exist in that environment. And I think best that we can tell in terms of reaching out to the pro tem and the speaker's staff that this is going to continue at least through the first quarter of 21. And so we'll continue to face that. I think, sort of I'm going to go into a little bit and introduce one of Sandag's, I think, major bills, AB 2731 by Assemblymember Gloria, a CEQA really streamlining bill that was really introduced to provide an additional option to help facilitate the Navy's Old Town campus development and possible development of a central mobility hub and a link to the airport. But when you deal with CEQA, even in the best of times, when everything is perfect and you've got money and you don't have a pandemic, these are almost impossible bills. And so we were, having to deal with that in this environment was extraordinarily difficult. And again, I think what made it doable is every time we had to draw on technical resources, Sandag really has the best staff, I think, of any regional transportation planning agency in the state. And I think that really made a huge difference. So we want to again thank Hassan and his team, Victoria, Robin, Ryan, et cetera. They just did a great job. And what I'd like to do is turn it over now to Kirk Blackburn to go over some more of the details of the bills, and Pat Whalen will talk a little bit about the governor's executive orders. And one last thing, Kirk, before I turn it over to you, we're all attorney lobbyists and we have a law firm, and I think our technical expertise and background working with Sandag has really been a great fit over the years. Kirk, if you could go into the details of some of the bills that we're working on this year.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brooks, and thanks everyone for having us. Definitely appreciated. Yeah, happy to chat a little bit about some of Sandag's priority projects. We've been working closely with Sandag's team, as Brooks indicated, to advance Sandag's priority projects in Sacramento. Specifically, want to talk about the first Essential Mobility Hub. Brooks AB 2731 by Assemblymember Todd Gloria. Provides additional option to help Sandag and the Navy as they develop the Old Town campus, and specifically the possible development of Essential Mobility Hub with a link from the regional transit to the airport. Building things, specifically strengthened environmental protections, including subjecting the Navy to provisions of CEQA that it wouldn't have otherwise been required to abide by. Also heightens environmental standards on the project. It will enhance public participation and government transparency through the process. And the project began construction in relatively short order, as it requires the courts to resolve all CEQA related lawsuits on the project within 270 business days. Ultimately, happy to say the bill had significant support, was passed by the legislature without a single no vote, and was ultimately signed by the governor on September 29th, and thus will go on January 1st, 2021. On that, it's also worth noting that several other CEQA streamlining bills were unsuccessful this year through one reason or another, specifically SB 995, which relates to affordable housing, and SB 757, which relates to transit projects. I want to briefly touch upon our work on Otay Mesa East. This project continues to be elevated as a priority at the highest levels, including both with Cal STA Secretary and Caltrans Director. It was most recently highlighted at the state's International Affairs and Trade Development Interagency Committee meeting. Want to touch upon the Mar Bluffs. So it's been great to see the level of attention placed on the Mar Bluffs project from the highest levels in Sacramento, including several bills, budget items, and within Secretary Kim's working group. So it's been great progress there. Briefly wanted to touch upon other key legislation in 2020, notably housing legislation. At the beginning of the year, both the governor and leadership indicated that housing and housing production would be a priority in the legislature. Obviously, COVID had a little bit different ideas, but ultimately the Senate Pro Tem introduced a 5-bill package having to do with to spur affordable housing production in California. SB 1120, which would have allowed for duplexes on single family lots, and SB 995, which would have provided CEQA streamlining for affordable housing projects. Ultimately, all these bills died due to policy concerns and political maneuvering amongst the houses that Brooks alluded to. But we fully expect to see these back, as authors in the Pro Tem have pledged to bring the bills back in 2021. So we suspect housing will continue to be a major issue in Sacramento this coming year. With that, I'll turn it over to Pat to discuss some of the governor's recent actions.
Thanks, Kirk, and thanks everybody for having us. Yeah, as you probably know or just have heard in the newspaper, the governor has issued, I think we're up to over 80 executive orders this year. The vast majority of them have to do with the pandemic and wildfires, but I just wanted to touch on a couple of them. The recent one that got a lot of press last week was the governor's mandate to get rid of all fossil fuel-based vehicles and switch to zero emission vehicles by 2035. That would mean 100% of the new cars sold by 2035 would have to be zero emission, and that would expand by 2045 to also encompass medium and heavy duty trucks. The automakers that you might expect have already pushed back on that, saying there's not a market. They've been trying to sell electric cars and only a very small percentage of people buy them, and also that there's a lack of infrastructure and charging stations. The governor's executive order is somewhat vague in that it delegates and directs a lot of the state and local agencies to try and develop the plans to actually implement that order. So we're a little light on the actual specifics of how that would actually roll out. The other one that came out 2 days ago, the 30 by 30 plan, Governor Newsom wants to preserve 30% of California's lands and nearshore waters, to preserve them and protect them. It's another part of his coordinated campaign to implement a broader and more aggressive climate change approach. Again, the nature of the executive orders is that they set forth kind of broad goals. They don't necessarily get into the specifics. And so once again, the governor has delegated to the resource agencies to identify exactly how they're going to implement those policies.
I think, Robin, we turn it back over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And last but certainly not least, Peter Piser.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Peter Piser with Piser Associates. It's great to be with you. It's the first time I've been with the Executive Committee this year. Um, I'm a relative newcomer to Sandag compared to the team from Brooks Ellison in Sacramento. I've only been representing Sandag for 15 years in Washington, so I hope to someday meet, get up to that kind of longevity that those guys have with you all. But it's always a pleasure to be with you. Before I get into my update, I just publicly wanted to thank Chair Voss for the comments he made at the Sandag board meeting back in May after my mother passed from the coronavirus. That was really a meaningful moment for me at a very difficult time, particularly because it came one day after we lost Paul Jablonski, who all of us worked with, and he was a good friend. And so I really appreciate Chair Voss's comments on behalf of the Sandag board at that point. So thank you very much for that. So Washington update. Very quiet year in Washington. It's a very peaceful place. We're just hoping for more of the same going forward. But in a little more seriousness, it has been a crazy time. And it seems to get crazier as we go through the year. But some things have been done that are very important to Sandag, so I will talk about that. Early in the year, Congress passed a COVID relief package in March called the CARES Act. That bill was a $2 trillion package of relief in a whole number of areas, but it included $25 billion in aid for public transit. About 314 million of that comes to the San Diego region to be divided between MTS and NCTD. So very significant help to the region. And in the area of COVID relief, the Congress has continued working on that throughout the year since March. The House did pass a new aid package in May called the HEROES Act. And that would have been a $3.4 trillion package, bigger than the first one. That included also some public transit money, $15.7 billion. It was would have been divided in a way that was really not very beneficial to the San Diego region. It focused on the top urbanized areas with population over 3 million in the 2010 census. San Diego fell about 54,000 people short of 3 million in that census, so fell below the line and would have been competing with other cities in a relatively smaller pot of money than the bigger cities were getting. And it was unclear in that discretionary program how much the region would get. After the House passed that bill in May, Sandag and MTS were in touch with the congressional delegation in Washington, both the House and Senate side, to make sure that they understood the impact of the House approach in that bill, and that it wasn't as beneficial to San Diego as it really should have been. We were very pleased to see just last week when the House passed a revised version of that package. They decreased the total funding from 3.4 trillion for all the programs down to 2.2 trillion. So significant, about 1/3 reduction in the program, but they increased the transit aid by more than double to 32 billion for public transit. And instead of the previous approach, they adopted a more fair approach in terms of spreading the money around to all urbanized areas, and also focused on areas that have ongoing transit New Start projects. So as a result of that, the House bill that passed last week, which is being referred to as HEROES Act 2.0, would allocate about 350 million to the San Diego region in formula money, and have about 10 billion of competitive grant money also that we could shoot for. So some significant improvement as the House went forward. As I think you've all seen, the negotiations to get a package passed by the Senate and approved by the President have not gone well. And it's a minute-to-minute thing at this point in terms of what the status of that is. The President earlier in the week announced that he wanted to call off the conversations. The following day, he indicated that there were ways in which they could restart. At this juncture, I think it's still unlikely that something's going to pass before Election Day. And then it's anybody's guess what a post-election session will look like when Congress comes back. But we're going to continue working on that to make sure that whatever package comes out has a significant public transit component. The other big piece of legislation that we have worked on this year is a reauthorization of the programs for highways, transit, and rail. These come about every 5 years. The programs all were set to expire on September 30 of this year, 2020. When the year began, the House got underway with a potential major 5-year bill. The Senate had started work on one last fall, at least on one part of it, dealing with highways. As a result of the pandemic, the activity slowed down, but the House committee that deals with transportation did, in the end, produce a bill, and it was passed by the House on July 1st to extend all of the major programs for a 5-year period. That bill would make very significant increases in highways and transit funding, about 30+% for highways, about 40+% for transit, but an even more significant increase in rail funding for projects on intercity rail lines like the Low Sand Corridor. That bill went to the House floor in July. One of the key things we worked on was an amendment that Representative Scott Peters sponsored with Sandag's support to make sure that the Low Sand Corridor project would have a better shot at being eligible for funding from one of the major public transit capital investment grants, which is called Core Capacity, which is designed to fund increases in capacity on existing transit lines. We needed a fix about how data from this year would be treated. In effect, we didn't want ridership data from this year to count as part of the eligibility consideration. Obviously, there are other projects around the country that would benefit from that, but the initiative came from Sandag, and the Peters Amendment was approved as part of that bill. And so that leaves open the potential that we'll have an opportunity to come forward with a Low Sand Corridor project in the future in that program. The Senate did not act on this legislation, and it was just not politically doable because significant new revenue was required to fund it. The federal gas tax doesn't nearly cover the current authorizations of these programs. Congress has been plowing general fund money into them for years. The House was willing to continue doing that. The Senate was not. So we are dealing now with an extension that was passed as part of a stopgap spending bill last week that will extend all these programs for next year, and we'll come back to them in 2021. But the House bill is an important marker. The House will probably start from there next year, and so we'll be picking that battle up in 2021. Finally, the annual spending for fiscal year 2021 that started October 1. Congress has enacted, as I'm sure you saw, a stopgap bill that will continue funding through December 11th for all those programs, every federal program at current funding levels. So final resolution for what the funding levels will be in the new fiscal year is remaining to be settled. And my guess is it won't be settled until after the new year. So finally, just on projects activity with Sandag, you heard Michael Comunez talk about Otay Mesa East. We've also been supporting that effort and expect to continue to do so going forward. On the Navwar site, we've been working with Sandag on strategy for dealing with the Navy and congressional affairs side of that as well, keeping our delegation apprised of what's happening, maintaining an open line of communication and maintaining that support that they've been giving us for that project. And on Mar Bluffs, we've been working with the Sandag team as they've been working through a process with the state's LoSAN working group that you heard about earlier, and also the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers helping with strategy relating to that. So I'll leave it there. I really appreciate the chance to be here and happy to answer questions, but not going to be making any election predictions today.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks also, Michael, Brooks, Kirk, and Pat. We usually get to spend some time walking the halls with y'all during the year. This year obviously has turned all that on its head and prevented us from being with you. But it's good to see and hear from all of you. I'm also glad you're able to join us today because we're celebrating Lori Gartrell Grover's birthday. Lori, I don't see you on my screen, but happy birthday from all of us. Committee members, comments, questions? All right. They were thorough. Francesca, do we have any public comment?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands raised from the public.
Great, thank you. Well, again, thank you all for joining us. It really was good to see you, if only via Zoom. This was an information only item. Francesca, do we have any continued public comment?
No, sir, I don't believe so.
All right, next executive committee meeting is Friday, November 6th at 9 a.m. I don't have a gavel here, but we are adjourned. Thank you all.